20% of working adults live in poverty. 30% of children live in poverty. Only 16% of pensioners live in poverty. So you'll so often see the comment, 16% of pensioners live in poverty. Isn't that awful? One, that's a relative measure, which is more to do with inequality than anything else. And two, it's the lowest of any strata of society.
Hello everyone. Today we're talking about the two-child benefit cap and the winter fuel allowance. Two policies that are extremely controversial, at least somewhat recently, and it allows us to put our blinkers on with the potential of World War III. So that's quite nice.
Well, given our discussion of defence last week, I think it's very much beneficial that we don't get involved. So I think we should very much stick to what we know, forget that the US exists, and just live in, again, our little UK bubble.
Correct. And I must say it's a bit weird for me to talk about the two-child benefit cap as an only child. So could you lend some of your experiences on what it's like being a sibling before we move on?
Yeah, I could do a whole podcast on this, and I'm really glad that I can just talk to you without the interference and of my sisters, as much as I adore them, if they're listening. But I must say that the two-child benefit cap is of particular interest to me because I'm the second child, and I have a younger sister who's obviously the third child, for those of you good at maths. And so I can very much say from experience that having that third child is not necessary. Really was not welfare improving for our family. So, I wish my parents had had a crystal ball, seen into the future of the two-child benefit cap being introduced and just gone, you know what, we're not getting the extra money. It's not worth it. And my life would have been so much better.
Well, there's a worry there that they might have reduced it down to a one-child benefit cap, Charlie. If you had it that way.
Perfect.
Amazing. So, right, we're talking about this thing, but we haven't defined it. So, Charlie, would you like to do a quick explainer on what it is? Why is it controversial?
For sure. Yeah, no, I'd love to. So this was a policy introduced by the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition in 2010. Essentially, it's a contribution to your universal credit. So those on low incomes, families on low incomes who receive universal credit, this sort of more united version of benefits that people now receive if you're on low incomes, they receive an additional £3,455 for every additional child that they have. And in 2010, this was capped to 2 children. So any children you had subsequently after the 5th of April 2017, my birthday, you weren't being paid for that additional child. So essentially, if you chose to have a third and fourth child, you would no longer receive this benefit. And this is a really highly popular policy that was introduced, one of the rare ones that was introduced by the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition in 2010. And the Liberal Democrats, Reform and Green Party have all committed to abolishing it in their manifestos, while Labour say they're a little bit more tenuous. They say they'll abolish it when fiscal conditions allow. And if you listen to our spending review, I mean, they're already in £118 billion worth of overdraft. So I don't know when fiscal conditions allow, but we'll see. The Lib Dems staying really strong on that one, showing a lot of resolve in, again, fighting a policy that they introduced. Really solid. That's a Lib Dem staple right there. Good to know. Good to know they've got spine.
So I've got a question there, Charlie. I mean, I didn't realise that it was popular when it came in, to be honest. I haven't done the polling on this. But so could you give an idea as to why it was popular back then and why it's not popular now?
Well, so essentially back then, I think predominantly the idea was that people, when fiscal conditions were relatively tight, we've had to find cuts somewhere. It's preferable to cut money going to people who have chosen to have a third, fourth and fifth child, sick child in very some rare cases, than cutting money for things like education, healthcare, pensions, whatever. So I think that was one of the reasons. And I think because it's perceived as a choice that results in an extra benefit, those are relatively popular ones to cut. And people sort of said, if you can't afford to have a third child, then why have one? There's also some perception that if you give people who are on low incomes money, then that might not necessarily filter down to the child. But we'll sort of go into some of the cons in a little bit more depth later, I think. But in terms of why it's coming a bit more into fashion, is there's a big push by these think tanks and child poverty charities against the two-child benefit cap. And that's become really, really important. So the Resolution Foundation, which is a really well-known and very rigorous think tank, has fought quite heavily against the two-child benefit cap. So this is the think tank that essentially wants to promote incomes of low to middle income earners, and they're very much in favor of dropping the cap. There's also a bunch of child poverty charities that are very much in favor of dropping it. The IFS notes that it's the most cost-effective measure to reducing child poverty, but it's not what they call a silver bullet, and we'll get into a little bit more. But just to give you a little bit of the statistics, so if you drop the two-child poverty cap, that would affect about 800,000 households, so about 10% of the working age population. So that's a lot of people. And we know that when fully rolled out, they assume that the average would be about £4,300 per year increase for every additional child you had. So it's a massive increase in income for people who are on low incomes with large families, to be able to support and lift them out of poverty. And so subsequently, if you abolished the two-child benefit cap today, it's estimated that you'd lift about 500,000 children out of poverty. And that would only cost about 3.6 billion, according to the IFS. And so by that measure, it's one of the most effective policies at alleviating child poverty that we can imagine. Obviously, free school meals is slightly cheaper at about 1 billion, but the idea is that that's not a income measure, so it's not necessarily captured under a lot of child poverty statistics, which is something we'll definitely get into. It is going to be muted, the effect, by the benefits cap. Obviously, there is a benefits cap that we have at the moment, so a lot of children would hit that. A lot of families would hit that benefit cap, about 9%, so about 40,000 families wouldn't see the full gains of the two-child benefit cap reduction. But fundamentally, a lot of these big organizations are suggesting, and big economists who really know their stuff have suggested that the benefit cap is not a good idea, and there'd be more effective ways of doing it. It's very cost effective. So I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Jack, for the positives of this.
Well, like you say, there's lots of well-known and established economists who have a positive view of this. I'm not an established economist, but it's worth having my view too, right? So let's throw an unintelligent viewpoint out there as well. So just for balance, really. But I think I'm pro getting rid of the cap again, with some changes, but we'll get to that later. And one of the reasons is because I would like to emphasise that this is to do with the child element of universal credit, which is the means-tested part of our benefit system, which is designed to basically alleviate poverty. And it's meant to be a social safety net, right? So I don't quite like the phrasing of it's paying people to have kids. I think it should be more seen as if you don't plan to be that poor, and if you fell into being that poor and you have already got kids, you want to provide them with a little bit extra support, because the children shouldn't be facing the negative consequences of perhaps their parents' just unluckiness in the labour market. So because I see it as part of the welfare system that's a safety net rather than just a general benefit, I don't see it as just paying people to have kids. Where I start to see that is actually in the child's benefit, which is separate to this, which actually doesn't get affected by the two-child benefit cap. There's no cap on this, but anyone can receive this payment, and I believe this is, I need to get my numbers up, I think it's about like £1,000 per child. £1,354 for the firstborn, and then £900 per additional child after that. And you can receive that as long as one of the parents, the highest earning parent, doesn't earn above 60k, and it starts getting cut off at 50k. But the point is, that's much more like paying people to have kids. And that's something I don't agree with for the reasons you sort of implied, right? But this other one, the two-child benefit cap, applies to something that is means-tested, and I see it as the social safety net, which I think we need to support and protect against child poverty. So that's my side on the pros of the thing, but we will get into other bits.
So we can get into that now, because is that not... So in what case, why are you against the... benefit cap, but why are you against the benefit cap but anti the child benefit in that case? Because obviously the child benefit isn't means tested, but the universal credit is. So where do you sort of see that line as to where it should cut off, I guess, in terms of income or in terms of how many children you have?
So I think we have to see, so just to be clear, both are means tested technically, because it does get cut off. The child benefit one does get cut off at 60k, but you can understand that, a family that could be earning 100k collectively, as long as neither of them is earning over 50 or 60k, will be able to receive the full child benefit. So So a lot of middle income and high income individuals would be gaining from this child benefit, which makes it seem more like we're subsidising people having kids. So that's a different argument in my head to the argument of let's cut people off from receiving benefits when they're in a bad state financially. Because the universal credit, the way it works is there's a taper rate, which means that once your income level goes past a certain point, it's something like 55% of 55p for every pound you earn over it gets taken back, which makes it one of the highest marginal tax rates in our income system if you actually think about it. But don't want to get into that.
So yeah, I mean, obviously the benefit system in the UK is where we've been burying bodies of policy for the last 20 years. So it's sort of like electricity, the UK benefit system, isn't it? It's like, we all need it, but no one knows how it works, sort of thing. Why do you have, so where do you sit on that line, I guess I'm asking, in terms of, do you think there should be a cutoff, in terms of the sum payment that you get for having children? Do you think that should be encompassed more into the universal credit system? Do you think it should be encouraged more in the child benefit system? Do you think there should be a taper? Do you think there should be a cutoff? How do you see that, I guess?
Great question. So because they're two different things, I have different policies for each. So one is supporting people as a safety net and making sure that children aren't affected by their parents' income going down. And one is more supporting people during a very expensive time in their lives, which is when they're having kids. They're two separate things, so I think they need two separate policies. The one that's supporting people from child poverty, I think I'm up for removing the cap, but I think that the marginal cost of having another child is not the same. So I don't think it should be a flat amount per child as it currently is, right? It's currently, what you said, 3.5k per child you have. There's suggestion, when I looked into the economics of having a family, that there are actually some economies of scale of having children. So that especially if they're close together in terms of ages, because you can pass down clothes, you can pass down buggies and things like that. So it means that a lot of the time they actually take care of each other, which alleviates some of the burden on the parents. So I actually think, this would be quite technocratic to get involved in, because it wouldn't be as simple as just paying a flat payment for each child, but you could work out how much the additional amount you get for having another child would go down by. So I'm imagining, say, 3k for the first child, 2k for the second, 1k for the third child. You get the idea, but you'd have to flesh out what those numbers should exactly be.
Yeah, so this is sort of a point I'm interested in, because currently that sort of does happen. Forgive my misunderstanding if that's the case, but it does currently happen where if you have the first child, second child, you're then capped. Like if you're on a low income, you get the first payment, second payment for having the second child under universal credit, and then it drops off, but you still do receive benefits for the third, fourth, and fifth child benefit. So at the moment, it is sort of currently tapered. Correct?
Sorry, you're talking about child benefit or the child element of universal credit?
I'm saying just in terms of, I'm sort of grouping them together, sort of, I guess, differently to your approach, by saying that if you receive a sum payment for having children, just add them both together, it is currently tapered the amount you would get, because you have the first child under universal credit, second child under universal credit, and then you get the benefits, child benefit, third, fourth, fifth, which then tapers, right? So I guess that is sort of the system we currently have, but you see this policies differently to do different things, and that's why you're separating them.
Yes, because, I completely get what you're saying now. So what you're saying is, because you can't just look at one in isolation, because you're also receiving payments from the other, which means that you are still getting the, what did I say, 1.3 grand or £900 per additional child that is not means tested up until 50 or 60k. I understand what you're saying now. Where I still think it's worth separating is that obviously if it was part of universal credit, it would be subject to the taper rate, so that you wouldn't be receiving that as a middle income or high earner. I think that the thing that I'm suggesting, which is a reduced amount per additional child, depending on how near they were born to each other, that would be subject to the taper rate as part of universal credit, because I think it should be part of the safety net, such that if these people fall into bad financial situations, the kids aren't affected, and it's linked to how actually costly it is to have those kids. When we're talking about child benefit, which is the one that you can receive right up until the highest earner earning 50 or 60k, that's something that where we're financing people to to have kids because it's an expensive part in their lives. And I think that needs a different policy, which I don't think we should get into right now, but I would be interested in something like a student loan style system where you're repaying it at some point. I don't see why it should be paid for.
Well,
by
that's
people's taxes.
Sorry to get really economically. This is a part of what's called optimal unemployment insurance as well, whereby there are some theoretical ideas that you would essentially say that form of student style repayments is a more optimal way of doing unemployment insurance and benefit system. But we can't, obviously it's a bit technical, but we're not going to get into that. I just wanted to get into why, obviously all these great economists and really intelligent people do believe in removing the child benefit cap. And I'm going to explain why I'm not a great economist and I believe that we shouldn't remove it. Or at very least, not completely. So I have three main arguments, essentially, if you wouldn't mind if I can go through them quite briefly, and then we can sort of discuss. So fundamentally, the definition of child poverty is something that has gone very much unexplained by a lot of the papers that I've looked at with this. So child poverty is essentially 60% if you have a child and that child lives in your household and you as the parents earn less than 60% of the median income, so the middle income, then that child is considered in child poverty. A lot of the definitions that I saw were nothing to do with child welfare. It was the income of the parents. And while the two are very highly correlated, I don't like the idea of governmental money being used so frivolously in terms of, we'll give them money and assume that makes everything better. And so you cannot be convinced that money will filter down to the children. Although there is evidence from quite prestigious journals in Nature and etc. that say that it obviously correlates, you can't necessarily assume that the money you give to people on lower incomes will necessarily filter when you've been testing that on higher income households. So I am a little bit dubious of that. I would much prefer targeting support. It's more costly, sure, but I am much more in favor of policies that target child nutrition, child education, safety, parental advice, free school meals, subsidizing childcare, stuff like that, where we are knowing what we're getting as a return on our investment and no good business, if you're going to make an investment as a government, I really do think it needs to be targeted. I don't think we can just sort of give money away for that. And also I do buy into this equity argument. I don't like the idea that people that have two children should be supporting other families that had 4 or 5 or 3, 4 or 5. And so I personally, as sort of a compromise on recognizing that, yes, it is a cost-effective measure, I'm sort of going to concede to what the Resolution Foundation was talking about and move more to what they consider like the least bad option, apart from removing it, which is the 3-child benefit cap or a 4-child benefit cap. Because currently, probably a 3. Because after that, the tail of the distribution gets so small that it's barely worth talking about, in my opinion. So I would say that you move to a 3-child benefit cap. I would means test the child benefit by more as well. So it essentially does, we sort of somewhat agree on that, I think. But I very much believe that in more targeted support, that would be my approach to this. And so I would move more towards the Resolution Foundation's style thinking, because I just don't buy the child poverty measure as it's currently measured. And so I think a lot of the studies done by the experts on this sort of don't take that into account in terms of convincing people. And that's essentially my argument.
Okay, so let's nail down what exactly about the child poverty measure do you really not like? Just that it's relative.
Just to be clear, I don't like the fact that it's just an income measure of the parents. I feel like we need to form a way of doing a more complex index, which essentially accounts for child welfare in terms of their health, education, safety, things like that. If you can measure it, obviously our statistical agencies are pretty incompetent at the moment, but if you can manage to do that, then that would be a much more superior measure, a far more superior measure to just parental income, because obviously it's correlated, but it's not necessarily one for one.
Yeah.
And a lot of the studies that show that children that are doing better have higher income parents. That's already tested on people that have high incomes. There's not many studies that test what happens if you give low income parents that extra money and how does that filter through. I'm also more in favor of subsidizing or cost supporting things like nappies and things like childcare and things like education and things that directly support the price of those particular goods, so that they're not spent on other things. And so I think this money should directly benefit children. And at the moment, it sort of benefits the parents and then indirectly affects children. And that's my standpoint on it.
Well, I resonate with what you're saying about relative inequality measures. I find that as a bit perplexing in all cases, the way we use it, because it's always called it's always called poverty, and it's never called relative poverty, which is actually more like a mix of poverty and inequality, right? So a lot of the time, you're measuring inequality and not poverty, which is an issue you're sort of raising there. And I think one way that it clearly doesn't work is that it's only linked to your parents' income and not how many other kids they have. Surely if you're on a low amount but they've got one child, that's less impoverished than someone on the same income but having to support 5 children. So I find it a little bit perhaps naive for that reason. So I agree with that. On the we're talking here basically about, should we give unconditional cash transfers where you just give money and hope that they spend it right? Or do we target the things that they would be spending on for their kids so you know that money's going to the right place? I like the idea of doing things like free school meals, and the one policy we really like at the moment is childcare costs?
Subsidised
childcare costs. I really like that.
Yeah, that's my new favourite policy. Yeah.
I'm a really big fan of it because of the impacts on gender. I also like the free school meals because of its effect on nutrition, so it has multiple benefits to it. I think the con of going down to the route of going as granular as things like nappies, which I still also support subsidising, weirdly enough, is that...
Do you know how expensive nappies are? I've only just found this out. Just looked this up, because I just had heard this through the grapevine because I just had a niece. 26 nappies for £41. Oh
God, really?
I don't know. Obviously, I'm not an expert on this. I might be completely off, but this just seems ridiculous. But anyway, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, so I can understand the benefits of subsidising these things, but the problem is it becomes so complicated to work out what is the size of the essentially benefit we're giving people. The nice benefit of just giving a payment is that you know how much you're supporting these people, and when you're trying to make cuts, it's very clear how much you're reducing it by. When you split it over all these different products, it becomes harder to compute how much support are we giving the lower society. Is it too much or too little? That's the struggle I have with it. But on the child payment thing and the free school meals, I can see that as a very good targeted route.
Yeah, free school meals, subsidised childcare. Another one that I'm a really big fan of, Jack, was these Sure Start centres. And I don't know if people know about this, but this was a policy introduced again by George Osborne in 2010, I believe. Oh, no, sorry. It started by Gordon Brown, of course, in 1999, but really expanded by the Labour government and sort of the Conservatives as well. And so these are essentially a one-stop shop for a range of services to local families with the aim of enhancing development and skills for children under 5 years old. And so these services include literally anything. We were talking about this before, Jack, but healthcare services, parental support, nursery care, early learning and childcare and education, parental support and advice. And these are things where you can go take your child and you are actively supported in your role as a parent. And this is sort of, as it sort of talks about what you were saying, you don't want to just narrowly focus support on one particular product, but this is something where you can fund and increase their capacity, and you can have a broad range, and you can almost act as that support that you need as a parent, as I'd imagine early parents need. And so in 2010, Sure Start accounted for about 2.7 billion, so a very similar cost to the child benefit cap and winter fuel allowance, which we'll talk about, for public spending. And so it was about 30% of overall spending on programs for under fives back in the day. But in recent decades, as cuts have gone on, they've just been cut and cut and cut right until they hit a bit of a nadir in 2017 and 18. And so evidence suggests a little bit of a mixed range for these, just to be transparent. So they have really clear benefits in reducing internalizing behaviors such as mental health, depression, anxiety disorders. But they have a very insignificant effect on externalizing behaviors such as aggression and violence. It's much less clear-cut at the moment. However, critically, the IFS find that these centres reduce the absence from schools and increased post-education earnings, and so much so that it actually ended up paying for itself in equivalent post-tax earnings. So it cost about 3.1 billion, but it received approximately about 5 billion in returns. So essentially they pay for themselves. And so, yeah. So it's a bit of a shame. It's a bit of a shame that we sort of don't account for these. And there's definitely a way of designing. Obviously, there's so much of this. This is just institutional design. How do you design them correctly? Obviously, these are statistics from the way they were previously designed. I'm sure there's ways of encouraging uptake and encouraging proliferation of these, which are much more effective in my mind and much more targeted than just giving a lump sum. That almost feels a little bit lazy to me. And if you're going to make an investment, make sure you know where it's going. And so that's my sort of standpoint on it. I think this is a standpoint supported by someone I very rarely agree with, which is George Osborne. And I hope the Labour government start to take this up. I don't know if they will, but we'll see.
Well, physical conditions would need to allow, Charlie, and unfortunately, physical conditions are
would
sitting in
need
the
to
corner
allow.
saying no to fucking everything, right? So
The deficit would go from 118 billion to 121 billion. So, big change.
yeah, when you put it like that. Brilliant. I think that's everything on the two-child benefit cap. Am I right?
I think so. Let me just do a little scan of my notes. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just seeing if I can throw in another dig at my sister anywhere, but I don't think I can. So
That's a shame. If you do think of one, then we can always roll it back and we can make sure we get it in there because it is essential.
Absolutely. We should just do an episode of me just reeling them off one after the other. Nothing else.
It'd be like the post-credits, wouldn't it? Just all the insults.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Well,
I'm doing
so
that.
now it's time to move on to the winter fuel payments, which is interesting because
Yes.
out of the two, so there's controversial, both were controversial. Labour seem to have made a U-turn on this one over making a U-turn on the two-child benefit cap. So it's
Yeah,
interesting.
nice. Thanks, Jack. I was already annoyed about this, and I hadn't thought about it like that. So, thanks for that. You've really got me fired up for this one.
Brilliant. Well, like we did for the previous one, could you just do a little explainer there, Charlie, on why is it controversial and what it is?
Okay, so we pride ourselves as being objective on this podcast. So I'm going to try my absolute best to do this objectively.
Right.
So the winter fuel payment essentially is a payment made to non-means tested previously, a payment made to pensioners to essentially support with the cost of fuel through the winter, and this came about to about £200, I believe, Jack. So it cost the UK government. Yeah,
sorry,
was that about it,
£200 for under 80-year-olds and then £300 for over 80-year-olds.
Perfect. And so this cost the UK government about 2 billion, approximately, relatively rough figure. After the U-turn, the government is now means testing that payment. So you receive it until you earn up to a salary of about 35,000. And so it costs essentially half what it used to, about 1.25 billion. And that's now means about 75% of pensioners will now get that winter fuel payment, which was previously not given to them. And so obviously people are very much in favour of this. They feel like pensioners are the most insecure, financially subset or strata of society. They feel like pensioners shouldn't go cold, which I fully agree with. And obviously fuel insecurity for anyone is awful, especially for those who can't work. However, what are your thoughts originally before I start
Before
ranting?
you start ranting.
Before you just let the dog off the lead, what do you sort of feel about the winter fuel allowance? Is there anything I missed?
Well, like you, I think out of the two, it was weird that they U-turned on this one. Because their plan was to make it basically means tested, wasn't it? Which I think most welfare benefits should be means tested, because it's then only the people who really need them that get it. This is raising it, was it, so that you can receive it up to earning 35k?
35,000, yeah.
I really don't see the need for someone earning 35k as a pensioner when your cost of living is lower, for you to need to receive this
Much
extra
lower.
payment. It doesn't make sense. Before they made the U-turn, their original announcement was that you would only be able to claim it if you were claiming something else like pension credit. Now, pension credit is something that tops up your income so that the minimum you can earn as a pensioner or be living on is the minimum of the state-funded pension. So even if you hadn't fully paid into your pension, you'd get topped up to that amount. That's still quite a low number. I would like to point that out. I didn't quite realise how low the support is for pensioners. That the minimum is about 10 grand per person, and if you're in a household of 2 pensioners, it's 18,000 to live on between 2 people. That's not a lot, and I would like to point that out. But still, going right up to 35k of support would have been, ridiculous, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So
you're very calm listening there, Charlie. This is a calm before the storm.
So, my main argument revolves around the fact that the pensioners are the least impoverished part of society, and we've consistently directed political and economic support towards a generation that just has a large voting base, and not for children. And this obviously ties very well into our child poverty section. So spending on old age, health and pensioner benefits combined in 2024 to 2025 cost about 270 billion, and that's about a tenth of the entire UK economy. Obviously, before the means testing came in, it cost about 2 billion. That's about 43,000 policemen and women we could have hired. The doctor's strike cost about 350 million. And also on top of that, the triple lock costs us about 11 billion per year. And I would also like to point out that the triple lock increased by about £472 last year, which is more than the winter fuel allowance. So no pensioner would have been worse off than they were last year. And that support could have been directed towards the removal of the 2-child benefit cap, if you wanted to do that, towards helping to subsidise childcare, towards improvement in schools. But no, we consistently direct this funding towards a strata of society that has consistently received more economic support than any other. And so I just wanted to rebut a little comment that's made a lot on this, which is that pensioners live in poverty. And obviously we've just discussed how we don't believe in the relative poverty measure used so often, but let's just go with it. So the DWP estimates that about 21% in the UK live in relative poverty. Okay. 20% of working adults live in poverty. 30% of children live in poverty. Only 16% of pensioners live in poverty. So you'll so often see the comment, 16% of pensioners live in poverty. Isn't that awful? One, that's a relative measure, which is more to do with inequality than anything else. And two, it's the lowest of any strata of society. 77% of lone parents face fuel insecurity, according to the DWP. 43% of non-pensioners face fuel insecurity during winter. Only 24% of pensioners face fuel insecurity. So these are working people face more fuel insecurity than pensioners by a significant margin, almost 3 times. Alongside that, the ONS states that the median wealth of pensioners has more than doubled since 2006, and it hasn't statistically significantly changed for non-pensioners since 2006. And you see this not just at median, but also in the 25th, 10th, 75th and 90th percentile. So you see this across the distribution, that the whole distribution of wages has shifted up for pensioners compared to people who aren't pensioners. And again, to reiterate, this is when we're looking at 30% of children being in poverty. Only 5% of pensioners are private renters. Most of them own their own home. And also on top of this, they also get the cold weather payment, which is a benefit you get if the temperature drops below 0 for 7 days in a row. And you also get the warm home discount. And on top of this is the ridiculous triple lock system that we have, which costs the UK an absolute fortune. And if anyone goes, where's all the money going? You can look at the pension system. It's an absolute drain on our public finances. And that's money that, like I said, could be going towards education, to making our streets safer, towards lowering taxes for small businesses, could be going towards roads and digital infrastructure, research and development spending, the military, for defense, our defense industry, anything. But on top of all of this, the economic case for increasing transfer payments to pensioners is literally minimal. At least with normal benefits, you can say, oh, well, there's an economic case for giving people on low incomes benefits because it gives them support, makes sure they're healthy and they can come back into the workforce healthy. It might encourage them to get further education if there's income support, to take risk, sort of gets the gears going of the labour market benefits a little bit. There's economic benefits to having a welfare system. There is no economic benefit really, empirically, for investing in pensioners, unlike investment in children or working people. normally the argument is that, we oversave as a country, so you have dynamic inefficiency argument, whatever. That doesn't exist empirically. So there is literally no real economic benefit for having sufficient payments to pensioners at the expense, and that's the thing I want to really emphasize, at the expense of working age adults and children, especially children who, isn't it telling that children can't vote, and yet they are they are also the part of society that's the poorest. And I just think it's disgusting, and it really, really winds me up that pensioners complain that they lost the welfare when they are the wealthiest generation in history, and it's at the expense of children's support schemes. And I just think it's absolutely abominable. So the Resolution Foundation, to get my calmness back, the Resolution Foundation I thought was going to be very much in favour of keeping the winter fuel allowance, given that their goal is to essentially reduce poverty and increase incomes for low and middle income people. But even they implore the government not to lose sight of child poverty when introducing the U-turn on winter fuel allowance. And they say it's a clearly inefficient way to address the current reality of energy cost pressures in Britain, especially when non-pensioner families are more likely than pensioners to be living in fuel stress. And they say, in principle, the fairer way to support for energy bills would be to target poorer families with high energy costs, regardless of age. Which is the way every other country does it. But because there is this fight to get pensioner votes, that's why we have this completely unfair, completely inefficient system that makes no sense. Why do we not just support fuel costs for anyone who's below a particular income? Have it as part of universal credit. Why we have to keep paying higher and higher bills on top of this triple lock to pensioners as the working age population gets smaller and smaller and wages stagnate, it's beyond me. I'm done now.
Mm-hmm. See, I understand that argument for the more wealthy pensioners, right? So as I say, I oppose the winter fuel payments and the U-turn they've made because they're now giving them to people who are earning 35k. That is ridiculous to me. But why would you say it's bad for someone who's a household that's on 18k?
Because the triple lock increased by the amount the winter fuel payment increased last year. So it's no change in their living situation. And the triple lock is more than sufficient to consistently keep pensioners at the top. And also and there is an element of me that is like, it's a generation that had free university education, It had booming house prices. It had everything. And you have to make choices in government. And I would much rather a poor child got the support and education they need than a poor pensioner. Because they have been so underappreciated. Well, you can make an equivalent argument for a child who's incredibly poor. Money has to be divvied out somewhere, and it should be given to children where possible.
Yeah. I think the standard left-wing rebuttal to that would be it's not just about rebalancing, the money has to go from the pensioners to kids, but that you could raise the funding for all demographics, even the ones that are doing better.
But the differential between children and pensioners is so unbelievably stark that any additional money you raise in the tax system should be directed towards children, because they are an investment into the country. They also massively under-invested in historically, and pensioners have had their time in the sun. If you're choosing where that money should go, it should go to children and to working age parents in terms of improvements in infrastructure, improvements in education, improvements in reducing crime. And that money benefits everyone. Reducing crime improves pensioners' lives because they're less likely to be victims of a violent attack. It improves the infrastructure. It improves their healthcare prospects if they end up having an unfortunate illness. It improves the lives of everyone. Why we're directing that money again in terms of just welfare payments when that money could be improved and targeted into improving their lives materially instead of just giving them income transfers. And again, no matter how much money you raise, it should mostly go towards children and working adults because the triple lock is unbelievably expensive anyway. And so you can't give money to everyone. And fundamentally, sorry, I keep using the word fundamentally. I do it all the time, but that's the problem.
That's the
when I get angry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the point I'd make is that the triple lock is obviously the growth in the level. The question is, was that level too low already?
I don't think necessarily.
That's what people would be saying. Fair enough.
Only 5%.
All right.
Only 5% of people don't are private renters in the of pensioners, and that could be for all sorts of reasons. Of that 5%, I doubt all of them are poor. It could be for other reasons. That some of them could be very rich and moving around. It's not necessary. Again, the median wealth of pensioners has more than tripled since 2006. It's remained exactly the same for everyone else. So no, and that's across the distribution. Remember, so you're talking about low poor pensioners. Of the distribution, even the lowest distributions have raised much faster than, and that's just indicative of current UK policy, because pensioners can vote and children can't.
Okay. Some strong opinions there, but I think there's a lot of wisdom to be taken. So hopefully everyone's enjoyed that. There's two very controversial policies to talk about. Hopefully we won't get too many hate messages in the comments. Actually, bring it on. Come on, send them to... I don't think Charlie's too worried about confrontation.
Actually do give us hate comments. I love it. I love it.
All right then. Well, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
Hello everyone, this is Charlie, Jac's better half. If you like the episode, please do consider giving us a like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and a follow and a 5-star if you're on Spotify. It really does help us out. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the episode.